Recently, I had a very unsettling experience that I thought I'd share. I'm 35 years old and I was with my 3 children, my 14-year-old son, my 11-year-old daughter, and my 5-year-old daughter. We were returning to my car after a successful trip to the cinema. We had just watched Despicable Me 4. It was all right and we were all in high spirits. My older 2 kids were walking on either side of me and my youngest was holding my hand. The showing was relatively late, so we got to the car park around 7:30 p.m. It wasn't dark at all, especially in the UK during the height of summer when the sun is still out. It had been a boiling hot day, which is important to remember. The car park was your typical multi-story one in the city center of a smaller city, but it was relatively open with big arches and decent lighting. There were only 2 exits on that side, the one we walked through and another one about 50 spaces up, so quite a way off. As we entered the car park, I suddenly felt like someone was watching me. You know that uncomfortable feeling when you just know someone's eyes are on you? I did a quick scan and saw a man dressed head to toe in heavy clothing, a coat, trousers, and a beanie hat, walking directly toward us, making strong eye contact. I noted his clothing because the car park often has homeless people hanging out in it for shelter and cooler air. Seeing a guy in full cold weather gear made me assume he might be homeless, but it was just an observation without judgment. The way he was walking, there was literally no other path he could take besides out of the car park and over the bridge towards the town center. We continued towards the car, which was parked halfway into the car park, around the middle of the half-full space. I noticed almost immediately that the man hadn't exited the car park as expected. Instead, he took a sharp right turn and was now walking parallel to us along the first row of cars. His speed had changed to match our slower pace, set by my youngest, and he was angling his body oddly away from us, but his eyes were still on us, just not direct eye contact. His head was tilted just enough for me to see his left eye. At this point, my internal alarms were blaring. I immediately told my kids to stay close. My son had also noticed the man and gave me a look that said, "Are you seeing this?" We still had a bit of a walk to the car, and annoyingly I had used my husband's car, which is a pain for car seat access, and also makes a really obnoxious beeping sound when you unlock it. The car was parked alone on the last row with other cars parked nearby. Further past it, there was a ramp leading to another level. Our car isn't at all a typical family-style car, but there was also a minivan nearby, and I could tell the man had assumed that was our car. He seemed to be heading that way, planning to loop around and approach from the back while I put my 5-year-old in her seat. It's what I would have done in his situation. I kept my eyes on the man and told my older 2 kids that as soon as we got to the car, they needed to get in quickly and shut the doors. No panic, just one of my do as I say, no messing around orders. By this time, my middle child had also noticed the man and kept looking at me for reassurance. I can't stress this enough. The guy looked like a predator circling his prey. The way the car park is set up with exits, there was no reason for anyone to be walking in his direction. His path led straight towards empty car parking spaces and a wall. As we approached the car, the man pulled slightly ahead of us, but still kept us in his line of sight. His chin was aligned with his left shoulder, which in hindsight must have been uncomfortable to maintain for the 2 to 3 minutes of walking. When I unlocked the car, causing that stupid beeping sound, the man made full eye contact with me, took another sharp right turn, and started circling around towards us in an arc. As soon as he got around to the driver's side, he started beelining straight for us. My kids got into the car as quickly as they could, doing a fantastic job of following my instructions. Within 5 seconds, we were all in, doors closed and locked. If it had taken any longer, the man would have been on us. As soon as the doors locked with a click, the man immediately turned away from us and walked directly back in the direction he came from, making a big loop around the car park and passing 2 exits in the process. As we started to pull away, he stopped and watched us the entire time, before finally turning and going back to the exit where we first passed him. This experience prompted a big talk with the kids about safety, opportunism, and trusting your gut. I also told them how proud I was of them for listening and following what I asked of them. I explained that it was probably nothing more nefarious than a guy seeing a small woman outnumbered by kids as an easy target for a mugging or distraction robbery, and that it was just poorly executed. My son pointed out that I powerlifted and said, "You could probably have taken him." I had to remind him that knives are a thing, and even without one, a man, especially one likely on drugs, could still probably overpower me. I also explained that no one would expect a parent to engage in a fight with their kids present, and my Google Pixel 7 is not worth traumatizing them over. It's the crummiest thing in the world to admit to your kids that you aren't the strong hero they think you are. I should also mention that this isn't the first time I've been approached in an almost empty car park, for anyone thinking I'm just paranoid. I once had a man try to open my passenger door handle in another almost empty big open car park in broad daylight while I was reading a book in my car waiting for someone. He walked across the entire car park straight at me and tried the handle. The car was locked, and he looked surprised when it didn't open. I yelled at him, and he quickly walked off and got picked up by another guy in a car waiting behind a hedge opposite. And just to justify my hatred for cars that beep or flash when they unlock, if you're being followed, they act like a beacon for your expected destination. Not too long ago, my train was delayed, and I got in at 11 p.m., so it was obviously dark. I got off with about 4 other people and unlocked my car from quite a distance away. A man walking on the opposite side of the cars further ahead literally stopped behind my vehicle, so I had to walk past it and loop back. As soon as I passed it, he continued walking through the car park. Maybe it was innocent, but it's one hell of a coincidence if so. Either way, I wasn't going to stick around to find out. This memory is one I've tried to block out, but the other day when my siblings and I were talking about funny things my dad did when he was alive and how humorously absent-minded he was as a parent, this long-forgotten memory came back to me. I can't stop thinking about it. When I was about 4 years old, I had a playground fall that resulted in a serious cut on the back of my head that needed stitches. A few weeks later, my dad took me back to the doctor to have them removed. I was very brave and sat very still for the doctor, unlike the huge fuss I made when they were put in. So as a reward, my dad got me an ice cream and took me to the beach for a paddle. It was a very small Australian town, and the beach was quite secluded. Even though it was the middle of summer, there were only a handful of slightly older children swimming, without their parents, mind you. My dad walked me down to the water's edge and warned me sternly to stay in the shallow water and not to go in any deeper than my knees. Then he disappeared, likely to use the public restroom or something. I know that looks bad, but he wasn't a bad father. As I mentioned before, he could just be a bit irresponsible and absent-minded sometimes, but he meant well. It drove my mom insane. There was an older boy, about 10 years old or possibly a little older. He was paddling around a few meters away but slowly came in closer, leaving the other children. Then he called out to me. I remember he had blonde hair and was smiling brightly. He asked me what my name and age were. I answered, also filling him in on all the important details about my trip to the doctor that morning, emphasizing that I had been a very brave girl to impress him. My story seemed to amuse him, and he asked why I didn't come out and swim a little deeper. I explained that I wasn't allowed to go past my knees until my dad came back because I couldn't swim very well yet and would get into trouble. He assured me that I couldn't possibly get into trouble if he was teaching me how to swim. Besides, my dad wouldn't see because he had gone. When I was still hesitant, he added, "Are you scared? I thought you were brave." So I followed him out until my feet couldn't touch the bottom, and he immediately held me under. I am getting angry and upset just thinking about it. I struggled, but he was more than twice my age and size. I realized now that he had taken me out willingly so the other kids wouldn't know what he was up to. Drowning an unattended young child really is the perfect crime, because you could very easily pass it off as an accident. Probably only moments before I lost consciousness, the boy abruptly let go, and my dad lifted me out of the water. I can still see the look of bewilderment mixed with fear and rage on my dad's face. Then, for what seemed like a very long time, he patted my back while I screamed, sobbed, and coughed over his shoulder. By the time I had settled and my father was satisfied that I was okay, the boy and the other kids were long gone, although my dad still went driving around looking for them. Had that kid stuck around, I'm quite certain my dad would have killed him. Edit. Just to answer a few questions, as far as I know, my dad never found out who the boy was, and shortly after this we moved towns. I don't think he ever went to the police, but I can't be certain. All I know is that he never told my mom about it, probably because she would have lost her mind at him for leaving me alone. Also, for those who asked, I really do feel that kid seriously meant to kill me. There was something malicious about the way he tightened his hold when I struggled. It felt like he was determined and not just mucking around. So determined, in fact, that he didn't even see my dad coming. So creepy blonde kid who is now an adult. Let's not meet again. I'll start by saying, I have a terrible biological father. He has been a shady person all of my life and constantly caused me a lot of grief. This is just one of those examples. When I was 4 years old, my parents split up. My mother and I moved states, and they agreed I would visit my dad every school holiday for a week. This one particular time, I had been with him for a few days when I was playing with my cousin at a nearby park. A car pulled up and I recognized the man as one of my dad's friends. He called me over, and without thinking, I ran over to him and left my cousin at the park. He asked me if I could show him where my dad lived, and I agreed and got in his car. I gave directions and didn't notice at all that they weren't following them correctly. Looking back, I didn't really know the way anyhow. After way too long, I did realize that we were getting closer to the city, which is far from my dad's house. We pulled up at a house I didn't recognize, and the man told me to wait in the car, which I did. I didn't feel scared at all for some reason. He eventually took me inside, and I definitely started to feel unsafe then. I mainly remember 2 girls passed out with their tops off, and a much older man was feeling them up everywhere. I made eye contact with this man, and he made me sick to my stomach. I had definitely figured out that this was a bad situation by this point. A lady took me into a bedroom and brought me a sandwich. The bread was stale and I wasn't hungry, but I ate it all because I felt bad for her. Which doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's what I was thinking about. The lady told me a lot of things I didn't understand, but when she left, I remember thinking my dad was coming to pick me up soon. I fell asleep waiting for him. I wet the bed that night and no one came to see me the next day until I cried very loudly and banged on the door. The lady came back and yelled at me for stinking up her bedroom, and I asked about my dad. She said he was coming tonight after he finished work. She didn't offer me a shower or a bath, so I sat in my soiled pants all day. After that, everything turned into a blur, really. My dad did not come that night and I was so terrified. In my head, I felt like I was there for months. I thought I was missing school and everyone had forgotten about me. In reality, I was there for 5 days. They let me take one shower. I don't remember eating much except for boring sandwiches, and I had chips and gravy once. Finally, my mom drove across the country to come and get me. After not being able to get a hold of me or my dad for so long, and then me missing my pre-booked flight home, she panicked and came looking for me. Thank God she did. She found my dad at his girlfriend's house, drugged out completely, hiding out. Turns out he owed a lot of drug money to the people who had taken me. They had told him that they had me, but he couldn't afford it, or didn't want me back. Whatever it was, he didn't bother to try to get me back. My amazing mom paid his debt for him after borrowing from a lot of people, and she came to get me back. I remember when someone came into that room and told me my mom was here, and I walked out and then I could smell her. It was the best feeling to feel safe again. She took me home and I didn't see my dad again for a long time. She never called the police, and my parents' relationship was very complicated then, and I fully understand the choices she made. I'm definitely okay now. I've spoken about this in therapy and I've come to terms with most of the things that I went through as a child. But still a screwed up situation for a 4-year-old girl to have to be in. So to my dad's friend, the sandwich lady, and even to my dad himself, let's not meet. I am a 21-year-old woman who works at a library. My job involves fixing broken technology and keeping an eye on the teen area to ensure everything is okay. Tonight, 2 teenage boys came in about 15 minutes apart. One was fine, he logged into a video game and started playing. The other one was quite different. I noticed something was odd right away. He had a strong smell of bologna and body odor and kept staring at me with a strange expression. I tried to ignore it, thinking that sometimes teenagers can be a bit odd and smelly. While I was putting books back on the shelves, he followed me around. He asked if my personality matched my combat boots. I wasn't sure how to respond, so I said yes. Then he asked if I liked to try new things in a way that seemed suggestive. I didn't catch on, probably because of my asexuality. I told him I liked trying new things and thinking he meant sports or food. He then asked if I wore leather. I said no, still not understanding what he meant. As I continued with my tasks, he told me he could never work my job. When I asked why, he pointed to the other boy in the library, who was celebrating a win in Fortnite. He bragged that he was too much of an asshole to deal with kids like I do. Since I usually take people's word for it when they call themselves an asshole, he didn't impress me. I shrugged and said I liked my job and actually enjoyed working with kids. Eventually, I sat back down at the desk, and he pulled a chair up so close that I could feel his breath on my back. He asked why I was wearing a mask. I couldn't report him to security because he was right behind me, and I didn't want to risk making him angry. I told him it was because I was recovering from a cold. He seemed to accept this until he saw me briefly remove my mask to drink from my water bottle. Once I put my mask back on, he poked me in the arm, telling me to leave the mask off, saying I was too pretty to wear something like that. At that point, I was ready for a break. I emailed my coworker asking for a break, hoping to wait him out. However, my coworker was busy elsewhere in the library, so reporting him to security wasn't an option. I had to endure it a bit longer. He asked about where I lived, what social media I used, and if he could have my social media details. I managed to avoid his questions as he leaned closer, his breath smelling unpleasant, and his face inches from the back of my head. Eventually, he got up to leave and walked out of the room. I breathed a sigh of relief and got back to my work, but then he came back in and continued talking. My coworker arrived just as I was explaining again that it was unprofessional to give him my social media usernames. I went to the restroom hoping he would get the hint and leave. Unfortunately, he was still there when I returned. My coworker thanked me for returning to save him from the kid. Apparently, while the boy wasn't sexually harassing the coworker, he was inexplicably intense. He attempted to drum up more conversation after that, but I think after a while he got bored and left. I reported him to security and tried to go back to being productive, but I just wanted to call my mom and crawl into bed at that point, so not much else got done.